What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we recap one of the most exciting games at the World Championship level of the past decade, that being Game 2 between Magnus Carlsen and Ian Nepomniachtchi. Some consider the Catalan Opening, including myself for a long time, to be a boring opening. However, as you will see, this game shows that this is far from the case. Much of the time, the Catalan is complex, and it really does have a lot of firepower behind it, as shown in this game. Here we have Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces and Ian Nepomniachtchi with the black. Here Carlsen continues with his first move, d4, and after knight f6, we see c4, e6, knight f3, d5, and now the move g3 with the Catalan Opening. Not looking to play e3 with putting the bishop on e2 or c4, but looking to fianchetto the bishop the very next move, and then simply castle kingside. Now, guys, here at move 6, Nepo decides to take the pawn on c4, and we now see queen c2 attacking that pawn. Now, usually here, black will play the move a6, in which case white plays a4, preventing any potential b5 ideas, and then just taking the pawn on c4, and already we're going to even out the material early on in the game. But guys, Nepo plays a crazy move here, a bold choice with the move b5, making this game intense at move 7, holding on to the pawn on c4, but also in return making this bishop on g2 extremely active, and Magnus really wastes no time in playing the move knight e5, attacking the rook. Notice how really c6 is forced here if black wants to save this rook. I mean, I guess technically you could play a move like knight c6 or bishop b7, but I would rather lose a pawn than a piece. And this next move here from Carlsen actually really has a good lesson behind it, that being the move a4. Oftentimes, guys, when we play Gambit in chess, or if we're playing openings and we give up a pawn or give up 2 pawns on purpose to gain an attacking edge, many players really worry right at the moment that they give up a pawn only about getting it back. I gave you a pawn. Somehow I got to get that pawn back. Somehow I got to get that pawn back. Guys, what is the point of an opening if you're going to give material and only want to get that pawn back at all costs? It is true here that Carlsen could have won the pawn on c6 both ways, but in either case, this makes the game for black very easy and even better. For example, following the move knight takes c6, black can simply take that knight. And after bishop takes c6, I mean, yeah, we have successfully evened out the material. But now after rook b8, I mean, honestly, I think black's game is better. This queen is attacking d4. The light squares are definitely pretty weak right now. And honestly, black has an edge in development and space on the queen side of the board. There's just no reason white would ever want to reach a position like this. Similarly, taking back with the bishop is a better choice than knight takes c6, but even then, I mean, black can just take that bishop off the board, and after knight takes c6, play queen c7, the whole idea being we're going to take off those pieces. And here, guys, yes, we're sitting at even material, but again, black does have an edge in development, space on the queen side of the board, and can even play the move bishop b7 very soon, really taking advantage of the light squares. White really just has nothing good to show here. So guys, in this position, Carlsen really isn't worried about evening out the material right away. In fact, in this game, he doesn't really seem to care about being down material. But in this position, we see the move a4, putting pressure on that pawn on b5. Notice here, if black plays a move like b takes a4, we're simply going to take on c4, and we're going to start picking off these pawns like candy. We see the move knight d5 from black, which is a good centralizing move for that minor piece, in which case we now see Carlsen play knight c3. We don't really need to be worried about b4 ideas because of knight e4, and the pawn on c4 becomes extremely weak. But here we do see the move f6, attacking the knight on e5, in which case Carlsen just goes right back to f3, and following the move queen d7, this may seem a little bit strange. I mean, why would black ever play a move like queen d7? It seems to kind of give black awkward developmental moves going forward. Does it slow down this bishop on c8? Does it slow down this knight? Well, actually, guys, I do think that this is a good move, and that's because Nepo made the intentional decision to go up a pawn by taking on c4 and then playing the moves b5 and defending that with the pawn on c6. If one of these pawns fall, they all fall. So why not play queen d7 and really give all of these pawns a ton of support, even the pawn on e6. So I do think that queen d7 is a very solid move. Here we see Carlsen continue with e4, expanding in the center, attacking the knight on d5. And now after knight b4, attacking the queen, queen e2. And here Nepo realizes, like, yes, white did get a strong center by playing the move e4. I mean, right now we are putting a good amount of pressure on that 5th rank, But by doing this, move e4, we now gave up the square of d3. Anytime you guys make a move in chess, you are gaining something, but you are also giving something away. We gained these squares of f5 and d5 and that strong center presence, but we did give up that square on d3. But here we see Carlsen just continue to march forward fearlessly with the move e5, and after bishop b7, capture the pawn on f6. And when I first saw this position, I was wondering, why did black play bishop takes f6? What about the move g takes f6? Is this a good option? Well, it's not a blunder, and in fact, it does do a good thing, in that these pawns do really get a good grip of that fifth rank, just as the white pawns did just a moment earlier. But now we could play the move bishop h6 with tempo against the rook, and if a move like rook f7, play b3, we're putting a ton of pressure on black's pawn chain. Notice here black can't take our pawn because they simply lose the knight on d3. And black has a very weak pawn on e6. Potentially, we have ideas like bishop h3 attacking the pawn, centralizing our knight to e4. If this pawn on f6 ever moves to f5, we're going to have that e5 square available. White is simply better here. And on top of all that, the king is pretty vulnerable to attack with not a ton of defense right now. So guys, following the move e takes f6, Nepo made the right choice in taking back with the bishop, and we now see Carlsen play knight e4, centralizing this knight, attacking the bishop, and eyeing that square of c5. And now we see Nepo play knight a6. This seems like a very strange move. I mean, isn't the knight on the rim dim? That is what they say, but in this position, this knight is actually very active, and it has intentions of coming to either c5 if this pawn on d4 ever goes, or to b4, which is a very active square. Sometimes we do play a move like knight a6 to get our knight into the game on one of these dark squares. Here we see Carlsen play the move knight e5, and I mean, just look at the activity of both of these knights and all the squares that they are currently attacking. They really do take up a large portion of the board, but in this position, Nepo doesn't seem too concerned. He simply just captures the knight right off. And then the very next move, he does have a big decision to make here. Many players would have been tempted just to take the pawn off on e5. I mean, this is a very strong pawn and very important, taking control of the d6 square, which later in this game becomes very important for our knight on e4. Why not just take this pawn right off the board? Well, this would have been a horrendous mistake from Nepo. It probably would have cost him the game because of knight g5. And just notice how much activity white has here in this position. Now, first off, if this queen ever leaves the square of d7 and stops defending the bishop on b7, we can simply just capture the pawn on b5, activating our rook, and more importantly, if black takes back, we can win the bishop on b7, attack the rook, attack the knight, white simply winning there. On top of that, we are attacking the pawn on e6, and currently, we are attacking the knight on e5. Again, I mean, if a move like queen d6 defending the knight, we could just take on b5, whole idea being black can't take back because if bishop takes b7, or even play the better bishop f4, pinning the knight to the queen on d6, and if this knight moves to a square like d3, we're not going to take on e6, but we're going to play queen e4, threatening a mate in one. And then the very next move, let's say g6 is played. Notice how we have a battery ram on the h1, a8 diagonal. Now we can take on b5, and because we have two attacking pieces on b7 and only one defender, black cannot capture our pawn. After a move like knight ac5, it seems as if for a second white is in trouble, but there is one single move here that gives white the edge, and that is the move b takes c6, going, look, you can win my queen, that's cool, take my queen, I'm going to take yours. And now yet again, a crazy position, a pawn all the way down on d7, an active bishop on g2 attacking e4, we have a knight on g5 defended by a bishop on c1 that is also currently being attacked. I mean, this is just absolutely crazy. If black plays a move like knight ec5, trying to somehow hold this position together, defending the bishop, defending the pawn, we can just take the bishop, distract that knight from e6, and all of a sudden we have moves like knight takes e6 is good, rook a4 is good, attacking the pawn on c4, bishop e3 is a good option, attacking a7. Black's pawns are extremely weak here, and Carlsen would have been very comfortable in this position. So guys, going back to this position, Nepo made a very smart decision by not taking on e5 because of knight g5, and all of a sudden, all of our pieces just really activate, and white's simply better. Instead, we see this knight that was brought to that somewhat strange-looking a6 square coming to c5, and all of a sudden, Nepo had many people wondering, is the champion in trouble? I mean, this knight on d3 is very active, as well as this knight on c5, attacking e4, b3, and a4 as well. If you plug this into a computer program, it actually tells you that black is better, and I understand why. Here in this position, Carlsen had a tough decision to make. Taking the knight on c5 isn't a bad choice, but he is down a pawn in material, and on top of that, honestly, I mean, this just makes the game really easy for black. Why not play the move knight d6? I mean, we worked really hard to get our pawn on e5. Why not try to get something out of it, putting pressure on a ton of the light squares and making this game hard for black? That's exactly what Carlsen did. And here's black. Nepo could have took the pawn on a4, but he instead opted for knight b3, whole idea being rook b1 is more or less forced, and now we see knight b takes c1, forcing us to give up the exchange. And now after rook takes c1, guys, in this position, black is not only down a pawn, but also the exchange. Carlsen is down 3 points in material at move 22. I would not have bet my life savings that the champ would be down 3 points at move 22. I mean, I guess I don't really have many life savings at this point, but anyways, you get the point. This position is very interesting though, because honestly, in a lot of ways, white is in control. It's very hard for black to maneuver here. This bishop on b7 isn't very active. Obviously, this pawn on c6 can't move because we just win the bishop. We also have a takes b5 ideas all the time because we'd simply win the bishop on b7. Many may be tempted to play a move like a6, trying to really solidify the pawn structure on the queen side here, but now we could play a move like queen e3. Whole idea being we have queen c5 and queen b6. I mean, we're really just sneaking into black's position here, and this is very hard for black to play. I mean, yes, black technically has a rook against our knight, but our knight is much stronger, and there's really going to be no way, guys, in this game for black to get rid of our knight except for giving up a rook for it, right? I mean, I will give you a million moves with this bishop. You're just not going to be able to reach the square on d6. So here we don't see the move a6, and I think that this was a good idea because it really does make the dark squares weak, especially that square on b6. Instead, we see the move rook a b8, which defends the bishop, and it also activates the rook just in case things break open. Here we see Carlsen continue with rook d1, eyeing the queen. Many may be scared here of moves like knight takes b5 or knight takes c4, but here we see Nepo just play bishop a8. I mean, I was kind of surprised to see this move, bringing this bishop back, and I understand the point behind it, but I was wondering, wait, why doesn't Carlsen just take the pawn on b5 and then play knight d6? But again, guys, Carlsen doesn't really care in this position about evening out the material right away. He is trying to play aggressive chess and trying to get full compensation for the material that he is down. So he plays the move bishop e4. Now, when I first saw this move, I was thinking, okay, he's just trying to activate his pieces. This seems like a decent move, not a ton of firepower behind it. I mean, it is putting some pressure on h7, but here, guys, if Nepo did play a move like b takes a4, Magnus has the shocking bishop takes h7, followed by queen h5, and rook d4. Whole idea being he wants to bring the rook to d4 and simply checkmate the black king. There's really no way for black to stop this except for giving up the queen for the rook. I mean, if a move like rook f5, we simply snatch off the rook and we attack the queen at the same time. So here black would have to play a move like queen e7, in which case we can slide that rook over. Black's going to have to give up that queen. And honestly, guys, I don't know how to evaluate a position like this. I haven't seen a position like this in quite a long time. I mean, here if black takes on b2, we take on c4, we're attacking a4, we're attacking e6, and there's really no way to defend the pawn on e6. The best move here for black is rook b1 check, followed by c5. But I totally understand why Nepo did not want to reach a position like this because it's just very hard to play and it's not very fun. I mean, this bishop isn't active, this king is in trouble, and even if we take the thought process of, okay, look, we can't defend the pawn on e6, right? I mean, if you're black here, you can't defend the pawn without simply giving up the rook. Why not play a move like rook takes f2? This seems like a good logical option, right? I mean, we can't defend the pawn. Why not get two rooks on the second rank? Well, now white could play queen takes e6, and this king really doesn't have any defense. If king f8, we have queen e8 checkmate, and if king h7, we have the idea of knight e4 attacking the rook and knight g5 check on the white. Black can prolong this with rook g2, but we're just going to play king f1. Black can't continue checking unless they want to lose a rook. Knight g5 on the way, forcing this king back, and black is in huge, huge trouble here. So guys, many were wondering in this position, okay, what is Nepo going to do about this threat of bishop takes h7, queen h5, and rook d4? Absolutely brutal idea. Is he going to play a move like queen e7? Is he going to play a move like g6? Here he plays the shocking c3. Many commentators were wondering what on earth is he trying to do here. First off, white could just take the pawn on b5, attacking the queen, and then gain a second pawn. But yet again, I still think that that's a good situation for black. They're going to be up material, the knight's going to be out of d6, and black has a very playable game there. But in all seriousness, I mean, what does this c3 move do? How on earth does this stop bishop takes h7? Well, let's just say we go with the plan of playing bishop takes h7 with check, and after king takes h7, queen h5, followed by rook d4. Now black could play the quiet move c2. Just throw the pawn down to c2, just throw the pawn down to the second rank, and all of a sudden, black's about to queen, right? If we play the move queen g5, stopping it, all of a sudden, there goes our checkmating ideas. And if we play rook h4, black makes a second queen. Whole idea being, I mean, if king g2, guys, I mean, black just has two queens here. They can play c5 with check, attacking our king. After a move like king h3, play queen f1, bishop f3. I mean, guys, again, black just has two queens. If you give Nepo two queens, he's going to win. So going back to this position, guys, a very resourceful defensive chess from Nepo. I mean, literally threatening to make a queen. I personally would have never even thought of that move c3. I mean, it simply looks like a mistake. It's just giving up a pawn. It's not stopping anything. On top of that, white has the option of just taking on b5 and taking on b3. But again, if white takes these two pawns off the board, like Fabiano Caruana was suggesting during his analysis of the game, black's still going to have an edge of material, and they're still going to have a very playable game, and black's simply going to be better. Here we see Carlsen continue with queen c2, keeping the tension here. Whole idea being, if pawn takes b2, we have bishop takes h7 with check, and after king h8, we're going to drop that bishop back to g6, and this king on h8 is going to be in trouble. I totally understand why Nepo did not want to do this. He instead plays the move g6. I mean, why would you take the pawn on b2 to totally put your king at risk? He plays the move g6, and we now see b takes c3, and following b takes a4, Carlsen takes back with the queen. And finally, guys, we have evened out the material in terms of the pawn. We have 5 pawns versus 5 pawns. Carlsen is down the exchange, but again, this knight, I mean, obviously it's not a rook. Technically speaking, white is down a material, but this knight is much more active than the other rooks, and the only way that black can get rid of this knight in the future is by taking it with one of the rooks. Again, I will give you 1,000,000 moves. I will give you 2,000,000 moves to move this bishop around and try to get to d6. You're simply not going to be able to. We do see black continue with rook fd8, really trying to give this queen some support. Whole idea being, if this knight gets out of the way, they simply win our rook on t1. So we see the move rook a1, activating this rook, putting some pressure on the a file. And now from black, we see a very good strategic move. Guys, in chess, if you have a bad piece, you would want to trade it for a better piece, right? In this position, which bishop is better? The bishop on a8 or the bishop on e4? Well, I would say the bishop on e4 is much more active, right? I mean, it has more activity, more scope. It's attacking c6, g6, covering the light squares, covering all the way down to b1. This bishop on a8 really isn't doing anything at all, except just defending the pawn on c6. So we see the move c5, and this says two things. First off, it threatens a trade of trading off the bishop, and it also threatens a trade of trading off the queens. Now, guys, in this position, Carlsen doesn't want to trade down queens, right? I mean, we're still down material. Why would we want to trade down queens? Why not play the move queen c4, keep the tension, keep pressure on black's very weak pawn structure of a7, c6, and e6, but even after queen c4, black is still able to take that bishop on e4. But now we play knight takes e4, and Carlsen is down the exchange, but this knight is extremely strong, threatening to come to f6, forking both the king and the queen on d7. So we see the move king h8, getting that threat out of the way, and Carlsen wastes no time in just throwing the knight right back to d6. We see the move rook b6 from black, eyeing the knight on d6, and also on top of that, just activating this rook, giving this rook some flexibility to do some things. And now we see the move queen takes c5. I know some of you are probably wondering, going a move back, why didn't black try to hold on to this pawn on c5? Well, again, white simply has too many threats. Black's pawn structure is not very good, and there's really no way to hold on except by playing a move like rook c8, simply giving up a rook, and in that case, we can just take the rook off, and I think that white is simply better because of black's poor pawn structure. So we do see the move rook b6, giving up the pawn on c5, and now rook db8, forming a battery ram on the b file, trying to gain some kind of activity, potentially even checking the king on g1, and we now see the move king g2, getting out of that potential check threat. Against this, we see black continue with a6, but what if Nepo played the move queen c6? This seems like the logical option. They're ahead of material. Why not force a queen trade, right? Checking our king and attacking our queen on c5. Well, the issue with this is that we could take on c6 and then win the pawn on a7, and we have knight f7 check ideas on the way. For example, if rook takes c3, which is the best move, we have knight f7 check. Whole idea being if king g8, we have knight h6 check. If king f8, we can simply win the pawn on h7. And here, if a move like king h8, we're just going to go back and forth. Notice here, if king g7 is ever played, we have knight g5, and all of a sudden, it's white with a huge edge attacking the king. And the very next move, we can win the pawn on h7 with either our rook or our knight, and black is in big, big trouble there. So guys, usually a move like queen c6 would be a very good idea, trading off material when you're ahead, but in this situation, it would give Carlsen the opportunity to take on a7 and have knight f7 check ideas in the air. So here he plays the move a6, all of a sudden reestablishing a queen c6 threat, right? Because now if we take the queen, the rook simply takes back, and now we can't even take the pawn on the a file at all. However, here Carlsen plays a brilliant idea, and that is the move king h3. Who on earth would think that we'd ever see a world champion player playing moves like king g2 and king h3? Well, I think that a lot of players can understand the reasoning behind this, but I do think that this is a very nice find to just voluntarily play this at move 34. This is also when they were in time trouble. I mean, this is move 34. They have 5 or 6 more moves until they hit that 40 move mark and try to get that extra hour. So king h3 was a very nice find, getting this king to safety. We see Nepo continue with rook c6 attacking the queen, and now we see queen d4. And following king g8, we see the move c4. I mean, the move king g8, guys, here Nepo is just trying to buy time. Again, we only have 4, 5, 6 moves left. Why not just try to kind of move the king back and forth, not try to make any mistakes, and just get that extra hour on the clock? Following c4, I actually really do think that Carlsen did a very good job of coordinating his pieces in the center of the board. I mean, this pawn on e5 defends the knight on d6, the knight defends the pawn. All of these pieces are helping each other, and white has a solid game in the center of the board. We see black continue with queen c7, and now white continuing with queen g4, threatening to capture on e6. But here black doesn't play moves like queen d7 and queen e6, but goes, look, eventually I'm going to have to take the knight, so why not just do it now? We see rook takes d6, and after e takes d6, queen takes d6 is played. And now from Carlsen, the move c5. When I was watching this game live, I thought black was going to play the move queen c6, right? I mean, just keeping this position together, defending the pawn on e6. But Nepo is a very confident player, and rightly so. I mean, he's literally playing the world championship match. He plays the move queen takes e5. And after queen takes e6, at first sight, it seems as if this king is a little bit vulnerable to attack, but black's queen kind of covers the squares really well. I mean, even the square of e5, right? Attacking the king and attacking the rook on b8, the queen defends that. So black's actually completely okay here. Carlsen continues with rook takes a6. Now going up a pawn, we see black playing rook f8, attacking the pawn on f2. And now after f4, we see queen f5 with check. Yes, Carlsen is up a pawn, but Nepo knows his endgame theory, and there's just no way that Carlsen can convert 3 pawns against 2. He does continue to play a little bit here with rook a7 check, and after king g8 plays king g4. We now see rook b5 from black, followed by rook a5. Again, Nepo knows his endgames. He's simply going to keep this rook on the 5th rank, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, not allowing the white king to advance, not allowing either of these pawns to make a breakthrough, forcing white to eventually play a move like rook e5. And here he just drops the rook back to a7, waiting around. If h4, we now see king g7. If h5, we see king h6. And now in a position like this, I mean, this king has to move, right? I mean, this king's going to have to move for these pawns to be able to march up the board and make a breakthrough. So we see the move king h4, looking to play g4 and g5 with check. But now we just see rook a1. Whole idea being after g4, we have rook h1 with check, and then simply capturing the pawn off on h5. Here we see white continue with rook e6, forcing the king back to the square of g7, and then continuing to advance with g5. But now we just see black check the king on g3, continue with rook a1, and following the move rook h6, attacking the pawn, black could have tried to defend the pawn on h5, which, by the way, isn't a mistake or anything like that. It's still going to be a dead even draw if black plays that game perfectly. But here we see black just continue with rook a4, attacking the pawn on f4. Notice here, if a move like f5, we simply have rook f4 with check, winning the pawn. And if a move like king f3 defending it, which is exactly what happened, we have rook a3 with check. Whole idea being, I mean, if king e4, we're going to check the king. If king e5, we're going to check the king. We're just going to keep checking the king all day long. And if a move like king f2, we can just play rook a4 yet again, attacking the pawn on f4, and here both sides agreed to a draw. So guys, we just finished up game 2 of this World Championship match. Both of these games have been very exciting. Yes, they have been draws, but there's really been a ton of fun moves and variations behind them. I mean, the first game was fun, but this game in particular was very intense with ups and downs from both sides. Let me know down in the comment section below what you think of this match so far and what you think is going to happen tomorrow morning as Ian Nepomniachtchi continues with the white pieces. Again, guys, this has been a great match. We still have 12 more games to go, as FIDE has added 2 extra games to their normal 12-game format. It's going to be a fun month. Let me know what you thought of this game down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to see our top 10 responses for black against the move d4, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn how to play the Ponziani opening, click the video to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.